Are you looking to start or expand your smart home in 2024? If so, then stay tuned because we're going to go over all the details right here. Here we go. The first thing we need to go over is the most important factor of a smart home, and that's having the approval of those living in the household. So this is commonly known as the WAF, the wife acceptance factor. But if you have others living in your house, children, other significant others, your husband acceptance factor, whatever your situation may be, that's the most important thing. And there's a couple of ways to achieve this. The first is that you want this to be seamless. You want the smart home to work around you, not you have to work around it. Because there's no quicker way than to have a situation where you have to find a last second workaround because something didn't automate properly. It should be no worse than it was without any automation. So if a light doesn't come on when it should because of motion, then there should be a switch right there. You press the switch, it turns on, or flip the switch, whatever the case may be, and it's no worse than a non-smart home. So that's the most important aspect there, and there's a couple other important attributes as well. The next attribute is you want it to be consistent and predictable. So you want something that always works in the same manner so that you know what to do and what to expect. So if you walk into a room and it has a motion sensor and that turns lights on, then that's what it does. And I mean, this is within reason. So there are certain constraints you can put on, conditions you can put on to an automation so that it doesn't happen in certain, time frames or certain criteria. So if you don't want the bathroom light, say, to come on at full blast at 2 a.m. if you walk in overnight, you can put conditions on it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't turn it on at all. It means that the appropriate action takes place and it's something that's predictable and can be anticipated and is reliable for your situation. And the final aspect of reliability is local automation. So it's really important to not utilize the cloud in all of your automations, utilize it as little as possible, because every time you're pinging a cloud, you have a couple issues. One is you're reliant on things that are outside your control. And then in addition to that, it's a possibility that that could shut down. And that's happened time and time again in the smart home arena, where the cloud integrations are no longer working either for your particular device or just in general, they shut things down. So avoid the cloud where possible. And I have another video coming up regarding that. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss that video, because I'm going to really go in depth on the cloud and see, explain a bit more in depth why you want to try to avoid that wherever possible. So now that we've established that it must work for everyone in your household and that it needs to work around your lifestyle, not you work around it, and finally, that we need some reliability and some predictability in the setup, let's get into the main brains of the setup. And that is, how are you going to control the setup? So we're going to go from worst to best in this situation. The worst method for control is a lot of apps. And I can speak from experience. Here you can see all the apps that we have that are here and available to make adjustments to our smart home if we wanted to through the apps. But that is the most inefficient way to control things. We have over 200 devices in our smart home, so way too many things to be relying on looking into the apps and addressing things that way, particularly when you get into the sensors. Are you really going to monitor each sensor, on a minute by minute basis? If you have leak sensors to see if they're wet, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. It's not practical, and it's not the best way. Not to mention that this really doesn't support the household achievement of making sure that this works for everyone. Do you really want your, significant other, children, roommates, whoever it may be, that they have to go in and open up each individual app to accomplish what they want to do? That's not going to improve the wife acceptance factor, and it's not going to achieve what you're trying to achieve with a smart home. I mean, it's in the name, it needs to be smart. The middle ground for control would be to utilize the voice assistants or a dashboard or switches for the smart control, or buttons or something along those lines that there's a physical touch. So the reason this is in the middle is it's far more sleek and streamlined and reliable and predictable, easy to use in comparison to all of the apps, but it's not as great as the fact that the smart home could work around you. And we'll get to that in a minute. But in this instance, you're using things that may be like the Amazon Assistant, where you have the touch screen, or the Google Home with the touch screen. You could be looking at an Apple iPad that you mount for the dashboard. So those are some examples of some dashboards that are fairly common there. And then next, we have the voice assistants. And for the voice assistants, you have a lot of the same players that we're typically talking about. We're talking about the Google Home, and we're talking about the Amazon Assistant, and we're talking about Siri. So in all those instances, those are the major voice assistants that people use, and they allow you to control your smart home. You can tell it to, say turn on a light, and the light turns on if that's what you have set up. So that's also in this middle ground. The last area in the middle ground are the buttons. So this maybe is a remote control, such as, say, a Lutron remote that you can hold and touch and carry around, or you have buttons mounted on the wall, or whatever that may be as far as a physical touch or a switch that you can press and have it achieve things. That's not very automated though. So in all these instances, the user is having to take some type of action to achieve the goal. And there's some instances where this is perfect. For example, in our master bedroom, we have smart switches in that room, and we prefer to tell Google when to activate or deactivate, turn on or off the different switches for the lights or the fan and whatnot. And the reason we like that is because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a motion detector in the bedroom. There's some ways around it. I've seen a lot of automations from other folks, but in my opinion, the voice assistant is just the go-to option in the master bedroom, or any bedroom for that matter, so that you can control it exactly how you like. You can also, this is an instance where maybe a dashboard, we have a Google Home on the nightstand that we can touch. If somebody else is sleeping in the room and you don't want to verbalize it, you can also have remote there. This is a great example where almost any of the options really work out nicely. Even the smart apps do work out okay in this instance. This is one of the few that I would consider looking at the smart apps. You can do like a shortcut though. It's much easier to tell the voice assistant on your phone whether it's an Apple or an Android phone. You can certainly tell the voice assistant to take the appropriate actions if you have it set up that way, and it's much easier than some of the other alternatives there. And now, the holy grail of the control methods, the sensors. So this is where we're talking about the motion sensors, the door and window sensors. It could be a leak sensor, it could be a temperature, humidity, presence sensor, lots of different options in the sensors. And you can utilize all of those to automate your home setup. And what does come into play here is what type of platform you're using. And we'll get to that in just a minute. But it's really important that we talk about the fact that these sensors are the option to make your home work around you, not the other way around. And that's one of our defining goals here, is to make sure that your smart home is smart and intelligent and has some logic to it where it's working for you. So if I walk in my master bathroom, the lights turn on. If I go into the shower, the lights turn on and the exhaust fan turns on. It continues to monitor for motion as well as humidity, and it turns off the exhaust fan when it's appropriate to do so. I don't have to touch the switches. I don't have to worry about humidity levels. Is it time to turn off the exhaust fan yet, or still a little steamy in here? What's that situation like? I don't have to worry about, did somebody else forget to turn it on? It just turns on, turns off as needed, no thought about it, and it's a great setup. And I have another video that you can watch where I have a bunch of automations set up, 10 of my favorite automations, and a couple of bonus automations in there as well. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss other videos like that. And you can go and check that video out right here. So if you're using sensors to control your devices, you're probably thinking, how does the motion sensor connect to, say, a light switch? Well, this is a really important aspect, and this is something that I think you should think about before you buy anything, and that is the ecosystem within which you're planning your smart home. So this is where we talk about, do you want to get a Google Home? Do you want to get an Amazon Assistant? Do you want an Apple TV 4K or an Apple HomePod? Or even better yet, in my opinion, you can look at a dedicated hub with some local automations that are designed with integrating with a vast array of products and companies into their ecosystem. And I was a SmartThing user for, I don't know, about 5 years or so, and it was a pretty good platform. Then I moved on and I came over to Home Assistant. And Home Assistant has been a great move for me. I'm going to do another video regarding the switch from SmartThings and why I did that. We'll just sum it up to say that the Home Assistant provides a more local integration with a wider variety of devices that are compatible and a lot more options when it comes to the actual automations. So that's been the answer for me, and you just need to make sure that you determine which system you want to work with and purchase that and stick to it. There's definitely different positives and negatives to each, so this is a choose your own adventure type thing, but make sure that once you purchase something, you try to stick to it. That way you stay in that ecosystem and you don't have to have a lot of cloud integrations back and forth between the ecosystems. And now the fun part of the discussion, the devices. So I'm going to start with devices that are not as exciting, but I think deserve at least a spot on the list at the lower end, and then we're going to move up to my favorite devices. So the devices at the bottom rung, which are still really cool devices and things I love actually, are appliance type devices. So this would be our washer, our dryer, and our Tesla. Those are all devices that we have integrated within our smart home, and we do have automation set up for each of those. But I wouldn't prioritize those at the beginning of setting up your smart home. These are more luxury items as you fill in the gaps in your smart home, whether it's to announce that your laundry's done a certain cycle, or to take some type of action on your vehicle, or notify you if your vehicle's not charging overnight, whatever those cases may be. That's more of an auxiliary type automation, not a basic automation. So I'm going to put those at the bottom of the list. The next item on my list are security cameras. Now, don't get me wrong, we've had security cameras for years, and I would not go without them. But as far as the smart home, I don't see the integration as critical. This isn't one of those things where, if we disconnected that from our smart home, we wouldn't suffer huge repercussions of doing so. So we have, I don't know, maybe a dozen or more of the security cameras, and all of those are integrated within our smart home. But this is one of the things where, if we didn't have a reaction to the identification of a doorbell press or motion or a person or a car or whatever else the case may be, it's not the end of the world, and something we could certainly live without, and it wouldn't be huge ripples within our smart home. So I'm going to put that next on the list. The third category of devices, from worst to best, that I'm going to put on the list are light strips. So we have a variety of smart lights that are not switches, and we have those across the front of our house. We have some Govee lights, links in the description below. We also have some Govee lights around our deck and under the beds and behind a couple of TVs that integrate with the camera on the TV to be able to show the appropriate colors behind the TV to make it more immersive experience there. With that being said, this is something that I think we can get away with without having directly in our smart home. I will say the Govee lights out front, super cool. Love them for the holidays, Christmas, Valentine's, St. Patrick's Day, Easter, all of the patriotic holidays here in the U.S., the Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, Veterans Day, all of those. We certainly use those. Halloween was really neat. You have a lot of different scenes you can use there. So, not to say I don't like them. I'm just saying, as far as building out a smart home initially, I'd put these relatively low on the list because they have the cool factor, but they don't make your life that much easier for automation. They do, for the Govee, especially out front, do make our lives easier at least twice a year when we be putting up Christmas lights. I don't have to climb the ladder to take them down afterwards or put them up at the beginning. And like I said, we use them for the other holidays too. So really a great product and something I'm passionate about. But when we're talking about the home being smart, it's not high on my list. The fourth device type isn't really a device at all. It's location. And we utilize phones, but you could certainly utilize other devices for that as well. But this is something to be mindful of, and really important if you have separate users in the household using Apple and Android, because you're going to need to bring that all back together. There used to be a great integration with Life 360 on a variety of fronts. That's been, we'll call it spotty at best more recently, where some of the integrations have been broken or they break temporarily and then get restored. Not something I would rely on long term. So, in keeping with our reliability that we talked about earlier, that's not the way I would go. I would actually avoid Life 360, despite being a Life 360 user for at least 5-6 years, somewhere in that range. I would avoid that, and we've achieved this using the Home Assistant app on our phones. And that's been a really reliable setup for us. It's worked well. We haven't had false positives on arrival departure type setups. So that's been our route. But this is something to keep in mind, because one of the things that we really like to do is utilize our locations to have automations, whether it's garage doors opening, making sure the garage doors are shut, doors are locked, security alarms, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's the lights off when you're gone. Whatever you're interested in, I think location does play a key role. And you can do this some other ways, but I find it to be easiest if you have it integrated directly with the cell phones that the user within the household use. The fifth device category on our list that we're going to talk about are devices that react to something or can be, triggers for things in some instances. But for the most part, these are reactionary devices, in my opinion. And that would be garage door openers. That would be smart locks on, deadbolts that you have. It would be a water shutoff valve, or it would be a siren. So things that are going to react to something happening in your house. So, for example, if you arrive home, the garage doors could open, or if you leave, they could close. Same thing with the deadbolts. You could have them where they automatically unlock when you arrive home if you go through a certain door, or it could lock, when you leave or when you do a bedtime routine, if you're going to sleep, whatever it may be. Certainly, if you have a water leak in your house, that water shutoff valve can save you tons of money. So it's one of my favorite devices we have. We actually had it activate one time. There was a spill, and we had a water leak sensor in that particular area. And it immediately shut off the water and alerted us based on our routine that we have set up, our automation. And I was thinking about how valuable that would have been, if that would have been, a crack in the pipe there and there would have been water leaking. And that wasn't on our lowest floor. So it would have flooded, through that floor and then went down and it went into the other floor that's finished. And would have been a really, really bad day. But the fact is that if it was a real leak, it shut it off in a mere, 10, 15 seconds from when the water would have started leaking. So it would have been life saving because it would have really minimized the damage. Might have had a little bit of damage there, but nothing in comparison to if that leak would have continued and we weren't home and, it ran for a few hours. So really, that's a great device. And the last device here is the siren. So for the siren, I think that you really want to have that when you have any home security set up, and you need to make sure that if there's somebody in your house, that the siren's going off, and that can alert neighbors. It can alert the person trying to break in to leave. Whatever the case may be, has a lot of uses there. It could alert you if you're in the home and somebody opens up something, or breaks through somewhere and they shouldn't be there. It can be triggered, and then you can be say you were asleep, it could wake you up, that type of thing. So really valuable to have sirens within your house as well, to make sure that everything is very loud, and nothing gets missed that way. Number 6 on my list for device categories are thermostats. There's a lot of different options here. Our option actually is not what I recommend. We currently have a Honeywell that is cloud based, which is why I wouldn't recommend it. A thermostat. I would recommend looking at some other device type. So I know that there's actually a Honeywell that's a Z-Wave that might make a lot of sense for you, or that I know Ecobee is pretty popular. There's a few other brands that are popular as well. But utilizing that smart thermostat to save you money, that's the key here. And this can be done through automations using some other devices, such as your location. So if you're not home, it would know that and be able to back off the heat, or decrease the amount of air conditioning being used in your house. And also, you have the ability to do it based on time of day. So if you have a really predictable schedule, then just a thermostat that has the time of day that you can program in, this ideally the 5/2, where it's 5 weekdays and 2 weekend days, or the individual days for 7 days a week, whatever you would need and would fit your schedule. You could do that if you have a really predictable schedule. We don't. So it makes a lot more sense for us to have it set up with an integration where it checks if we leave, it knows when we arrive home, it knows the time of day, and can react to all those things. So overnight, we have the heat back down a little bit to try to save some money. We have a mini split that we actually set up utilizing an IR blaster. So we back it off and turn it up at different times of the day. Most of that's regarding our time of use pricing for our electricity, but also it just makes sense to save money if you don't need it during that time. Now we're really getting into some of my favorite devices. We have a few more categories to go, so don't tune out yet, because you're going to be really excited to see those. But this is right in the meat of the home automation sensors, and that would include the window or door sensors, which are open close sensors, so it knows when they pull apart and when they get back together, or slide apart and slide back together. The motion sensors that would detect motion, potentially also detecting other things, like ours also detect the humidity as well as the temperature, and we can automate based on those attributes as well. And then we have the leak sensors. So that would be a water leak sensor. So if they get wet, they can report back the status of wet to the automation control unit. And finally, we have a pretty unique item that I don't see a lot of people talking about. We have a sensor that's a Z-Wave sensor that we have installed right beside our smoke detector, and that detects the carbon monoxide or the smoke alarm going off. So we can automate based on those things as well. Really useful if we're sleeping, or if we're outside the home and we need to make sure that everything reacts appropriately when one of those devices, is triggered. And this is where we really get into the home automation. So when you walk in the room, the lights turn on, and that can be the lights turn on at a certain brightness during the day, a different brightness at a different time. It could be based on who's in the house. So, if I'm the only one home and I walk into a room, it can react differently than if other folks are home in my house. We can have different modes set up in our house using virtual switches or Boolean helpers, depending on your system. And that'll allow you to have, say, a guest mode, where you say if you're having a party, you turn on the guest mode, or if there's a relative over and you're leaving the house, maybe a babysitter, whatever it may be, your house can react differently, knowing that there's other people here that are not normally here, and you might want automations to work differently, maybe a little less automated, if you will. That way they're used to light switches, and you don't want to automate the lights turning on. or lights turning off on them, or whatever it may be. You can do those things using those extra virtual type switches that you could automate on. The window and door sensors can be utilized obviously in a security system setup where you know if somebody opened or closed a window or door. It could also be actually used with your thermostat. So if a certain door remains open, say it's a sliding door to a patio and you have it open because it's a nice day out, you don't want your air conditioning to run just to cool the outside, say in that instance. So you can have your thermostat back off or turn off or switch into a different mode based on the fact that the door was left open for a period of time. So you can do some different automations there that are really interesting. You could have it automate based on your refrigerator. If you have it on top of your refrigerator and the door opens and remains open, you could be alerted that somebody left the refrigerator door open. It could save you money because you're not going to have spoiled food, and save your health as well, because you might not feel well, in a few days if somebody comes back and closes that fridge after it's been open for quite some time and the food inside, was exposed to temperatures that it shouldn't have been. Then you get sick. Certainly not a fun situation, one you want to avoid, and it's a pretty easy automation. We actually also put motion sensors inside of our refrigerators, not for the motion aspect, but rather for the temperature aspect. So we can monitor those. So if something, goes wrong, or if we don't have electricity, the breaker trips for whatever reason, something happens and the refrigerator temperature gets too high, we can monitor it and know how long it was that high, and we can react based on that so that we avoid eating the spoiled food. And I did talk about the leak sensors a little bit ago. If there's a leak, we get some different notifications. And then if it's certain things leaking, we actually have the water being shut off. And that's a really exciting automation, something pretty unique. Not a lot of people are doing that. But I think certainly the potential value is there in that automation, because that could be a huge, huge expense from a water leak and potential flooding within your home. So that wraps up the sensor device category. The next category is even better. This is where our switches and plugs come in. And some of my absolute favorite smart home devices, this, you watch some other videos, are the Lutron Caseta switches. I've talked about those a lot because they're just some of my favorite devices. They are the most reliable device that we own when it comes to the smart home. They're the only one that I can't think of a single instance that they've failed. And we have 70 some devices, and we've had those for years now. And they are absolutely perfect when it comes to home automation. They're actually utilized in a lot of other spaces as well. I understand that they're utilized by flippers of houses where they have stairwells that are potentially outside compliance when they're doing an improvement there, and they don't want to run the wiring. So they can utilize the remotes with those with the 10-year battery and be able to put the remote at the top or bottom of the stairs with the switch at the other end and have that home back in compliance. So there's a lot of uses of those. Not to mention that the Pico remotes, when you have those within Home Assistant, it actually exposes each of the button presses. So we have special automation set up, and you can press a button and have it interact with your house however you like. It doesn't have to necessarily turn on or off a light. It could do anything else. It could make an announcement on one of your smart devices. You could send something, to your phone, whatever it is you want to do, you could certainly do that. And for the plugs, you have a lot of variety of uses for these. One item I'm going to start with actually is not something you'd think of probably, but if you're into the home automation and you have different devices that run on different wireless protocols such as Zigbee or Z-Wave, then what the smart plugs typically are doing is acting as a repeater for those. So if you get a Zigbee or Z-Wave smart plug, you can utilize those as a repeater, make your mesh network that repeats the signal for those devices even stronger and helps those to stay online and use less battery and not struggle to get their signal back to the control unit that you're utilizing. The one thing I will call out there, though, is we have the Aqara water leak sensors. And in that instance, the repeaters that work with those are the Aqara smart plugs. So a lot of people have a lot of issues where they're trying to utilize other Zigbee smart plugs, but they don't really act as repeaters for those water leak sensors because they're typically a stubborn sensor. and they only want to work back through the Aqara plugs, and that seems to be some type of proprietary protocol that they were utilizing on those devices. But they're super, affordable for those water leak sensors, and well worth it to buy the smart plugs that are the Aqara brand. And actually, the smart plugs work really great. They have the power monitoring and the other attributes you'd be looking for in a smart plug. So why else have a smart plug other than repeating your mesh network for your, say, Zigbee or Z-Wave devices? Well, you can automate based on motion with these. So if you have, say, a lamp in a room, you could automate based on the motion of somebody walking into that room. You could have it automate based on time. So during Christmas time, we have a Christmas tree and some other holiday decorations, and we have those set on timers. So it reacts based on what time of day it is. And in addition to that, whether or not we're home, so it doesn't turn on lights that are not visible from the outside unless somebody is within the house. So saves electricity that way. Speaking of saving electricity, we use them for time of use as well. So if we have certain devices that we don't want to run during our peak electric price period, we can actually turn those off and save the money and activate those during a cheaper time frame and save money in that aspect. Another thing we're planning on is we're getting solar with battery backup, and that'll be a great opportunity to be able to shut off some of those devices when we're running on our batteries. So if we don't need a certain device, we can shut that off, save that electricity, and prolong the period that we can run on our batteries alone and keep our food in the refrigerator, fresh and cold, and keep ourselves comfortable and happy and pleasant within the house. And now for my absolute favorite smart home devices, the smart robot vacuums and mops. And really it's because we've saved so much time with these. It is insane how much time we used to spend vacuuming and mopping. And that's because we have a dog. It's a German Shepherd Golden Retriever. So there's just pet hair everywhere. So having to vacuum quite frequently for him. And then we have children as well. So there's spills, crumbs, etc. Always something going on to make some type of mess. Maybe it's just folks walking through the house and tracking something in and something to clean up, or the dog goes out and it's a little muddy and he gets mud on the floor, or some dirt on the floor, whatever it may be. Lots of things, creating messes, but these work great, and they've really come a long way. We currently have an iRobot branded S9 vacuum and the M6 mop, and we're really happy with those. We've had those both for quite a long time now. I want to say it's been 2-3 years. I think we got the mop right when it came out, and then it's probably been a year and a half or 2 years since we bought the iRobot branded robot vacuums. We used to have Neato vacuums. We actually had, I want to say, 4 or 5 of those, because a couple of those got replaced under warranty, and we had some other issues. And what would end up usually happening is our carpet was pretty thick, and we would run it and it would wear out some of the parts on the rotation. So that was why we moved away from those and moved over to the iRobot once they had that D shape with the the shape where it gets you the more into the corner, out front. And we thought it would probably do a pretty good job, and it has the dual rollers, which is superior to what the Neato had. So if you're looking for the particular robot vacuum and mop that we have, I'm going to link that in the description below, so you can take advantage of that and check those out for yourself. But I would definitely recommend investing first in a robot vacuum or mop. There isn't any way that you could improve your wife acceptance factor or the agreement of everybody else in your household more than reducing the amount of time that's spent on chores around the house. Now that we've talked about all the device types, the next thing to talk about are protocols. So you've probably seen Matter, and the real question always is, does matter matter? Well, maybe is the answer I think that's appropriate. So you have a couple of different options, and Matter really integrates with several of the options. So you could have Thread devices, or Zigbee devices, or Z-Wave devices, or Wi-Fi devices. Those are the major protocols. There's some other protocols that are out there that you might see here and there, different Bluetooth or long range type protocols, but these are the ones that I would focus on most heavily. Thread is the future protocol, if you will, but depending on your main control hub, it may make sense to go with a different protocol. There's always a debate about Wi-Fi, and you have two real camps here. One is avoid the Wi-Fi because it's going to clog up your network and overwhelm everything. The other camp says if you have a great Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter and you can do whatever you want. Well, I'm sort of in the middle. If anything, maybe I lean a little bit more towards avoiding the Wi-Fi, but it doesn't mean I rule it out either. So what I do is I take into consideration a few things. One is the cost and probability of the reliability of the device. So if I can go with something that's Z-Wave or Zigbee, I'm going to probably go in that direction. We have a lot of devices. We have a good mesh network, and not any issues with either of those protocols. It also lightens the load on our Wi-Fi. Not to say that we couldn't handle a few more Wi-Fi devices, but I don't see a real point in putting them on there when we can utilize these other protocols, and we can go with battery devices, and the batteries last a long time on these low power consumption protocols such as Zigbee and Z-Wave. If there is a Thread enabled device, you're going to need to make sure you have the proper border router for the Thread devices. So, some type of assistant that can act as a border router or whatnot, that you make sure that you have everything set up. I will say, it seems to me a lot of these devices are more expensive, and I don't see the benefit at this time. Moving forward, it may make some more sense once some of the protocols get figured out a little bit more and Matter gets integrated better. Maybe these are going to make more sense. But if you're going with something like Home Assistant, I really do think the Zigbee and Z-Wave devices are the way to go, for a few reasons. One of them is there's certain devices that just aren't available yet on Thread. So you're going to have to still have a decent mesh network to be able to handle those types of devices. The smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector is a great example. I don't know of one of those that's available on Thread, but we have that as Z-Wave. We have some of the other sensors. We probably couldn't find a leak sensor that's $15 or so US that would work on Thread. All of our Aqara leak sensors were in that range, or even cheaper in some instances when we bought them on Amazon. So certainly cost is included as a criteria here. Lightening the load on Wi-Fi can be a criteria, but I don't think that's a hard and fast rule. It's not a constraint in this case, but certainly something to take into consideration. I think more importantly than avoiding the Wi-Fi is making sure that you avoid as many cloud-based products as possible. And I did talk about this a little bit earlier, but where you're looking at Zigbee or Z-Wave, you're guaranteed that you have that local connection, and that's going to help you avoid the cloud, so that you don't have those issues in addition to any other issues you have. Once you do have some devices in your house and you're looking to automate, you're going to need to think about your automations and be realistic with your expectations, and start simple. And it's going to depend on how much you want to learn. Whether, say, you get into Home Assistant, there's a good UI actually for Home Assistant at this point that didn't used to exist. So it scared off a lot of people in the past when you heard about YAML and you had to write the code for that. At this point, you really don't have to. It's certainly in there as an option. So if you'd like to go that route, you can. But there's a lot of UI options, or there's Node-RED. There's different ways to address it. But what you need is a trigger, and then if you have any conditions, and then what actions you want to take. So if you want to turn on the light in your master bathroom 100% during the day, but from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. you only want to come on 50%. you would have, the condition be that you wanted the motion sensor to be triggered, and then you could use the time as the condition. So the trigger would be the motion sensor, the time is condition, and then the action would be turning on the light, and then it would be based on the time which percentage you went to. Another consideration when you're first setting up everything is when you get to 200 plus devices and numerous automations with those devices, it's good to keep things organized and in a logical manner. So what I do is when I'm adding a device to our smart home, say it's a Lutron light switch, what I tend to do is and I don't tend to do it, I always do this, I put the room name followed by the device, and then I put the type of device if it's appropriate, like it's a plug or a leak sensor or something like that. I'll put that on the end. So it could be the theater, and it might be the backlights. So that would be one of the switches, and that's how I name it. And then it's pretty easy to always find those. Or it could be the master bathroom toilet leak sensor. That's the naming convention that I use consistently. So when I go to look for a device, I can find it very easily based on the room, or if I search it based on leak, I can immediately find those. If it's a plug, I put the word plug in it, so I can search for that and immediately just see the plugs. Very easy naming convention. And then once I get into the automations, I have a prefix that I put on those. So it could be alert or location or motion, or we have some virtual, switches that we have set up through Home Assistance helpers. Whatever that prefix is, I put that on the front so that I have those nice and organized, and I need to go in and look at something, or I just adjust something, disable something, get some feedback from somebody else in the household that it could work a little bit better or differently. I know exactly where to go, and I go in and adjust it. So the last item I have here is to have fun. That's the most important thing about home automation. It should be a fun experience. So you can tinker around if you like, you can get into those weeds, or you can just be, in a situation where you impress your friends. They come over and your house reacts to them being there. And when they do certain things, like they walk in the restroom and it can turn on the light, they stay in there too long, it turns on the fan. If you can dream it up, you can certainly do it, and you might be able to impress your friends with some of that. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos.